Hi there everyone. So yeah, like Ian said, I've been here now for about 11 years at the company, and I've been using Google Analytics ever since it kind of got bought from Urchin by Google. So I've seen the full development of what is ultimately an incredibly powerful tool these days. So I just wanted to run you through really a few of the, I suppose, the difference between what you would do as a bog standard implementation and what you can really supercharge and put your implementation on steroids, I suppose. So the four things I'm going to touch on here is kind of how to customize your implementation and your setup, the problem of offline activity and how you marry that up with your online data, BigQuery. Is something that's already been touched on, but I'll give you a couple of use cases and examples really about what that is. And then there's one more feature here called Enhanced E-commerce, which is really for e-commerce sites. So I'll touch through all those as we go. So customizing your implementation then. So I suppose everyone's familiar with Google Analytics, and I mean pretty much everyone. And out of the box, you get kind of all kinds of standard dimensions, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with this type of thing. And that's really one of the huge selling points of, the tool itself. The familiarity people already have and what you get without having to really break sweat. You just put a little bit of JavaScript on your site, and you get so much from it already. Out of the box you'd get kind of 400 dimensions and metrics, which is kind of, most people can get by on that and get an incredible amount from it. But I suppose when you're taking it to the next level and I suppose really customizing your implementation and giving yourself a kind of enterprise class implementation, there's a lot more that can be done. So you don't have to make do with the one size fits all that you get with your simple JavaScript on the top of every page install. And there's a huge amount you can do really to kind of customize, I suppose, what you can get out of it, because every business at the end of the day is different, and you've all got different measurement needs and different things you want to understand. So just to touch then, so custom dimensions and metrics aren't something that is only available in 360. You can get a taste for it in the free version, and 20 kind of dimensions and metrics is kind of enough to get quite a lot of extra insight. So if you're really going to supercharge your kind of implementation and you've got a huge enterprise, different needs, you've got the kind of 200 there, and don't forget that's in addition to the 400 or so that you'd get with the standard version. I was just going to talk you through really the process of how you get from that, just pasting your JavaScript on every page, to a kind of customized enterprise kind of class implementation really. So I suppose at Search Labs, when we work with a client, the first thing we do is we go and sit with all the stakeholders in a business, and we get to understand what you are, what you do, the different things that exist in your business, and what it is that you want to measure. And I'll give you a few examples. So once you understand that, we can start to then define these dimensions, and we've got to kind of plan out these dimensions and metrics that you want to see. So, I'll come on to kind of examples in a bit, but we'll sit down with you and identify these things you want to track and the metadata and the attributes that belong to them, and then we'll kind of move on to this kind of implementation stage, which is really just about working with developers, if needed, to output that data in a simplified format onto your website, which you can then customize and take into the tracking snippet and into the tracking code and push out to the platform really. And then I suppose the final step is kind of maintenance, and whenever you create something software-wise that's complex, the more complex it is, the more likely it is to eventually fail. And at Search Labs we would always kind of work to output a very clearly defined document and understanding within the organisation, so everybody that uses the tool understands what is there, because there's no point in doing clever stuff if only one or two people understand it. So that kind of, I'll just touch really on Google Tag Manager. So when you're choosing an analytics solution, especially at an enterprise level, a big consideration is the cost and the speed and the effectiveness of kind of how you get that set up. And Google, I'm sure you all know, gives a free tool, but there's also a 360 version of that which gets bundled if you do buy one of the suite products for no charge. And I suppose because it's part of that suite, it's built for using and doing this powerful advanced stuff in Google Analytics. So I suppose whereas in other tag management solutions or indeed other analytics packages, the implementation can get much more complicated. Having these inbuilt templates and a tool specifically designed for implementing hard things gives you a lot, really, and it's kind of fairly self-documenting in itself, and it kind of packages out this complexity into a very defined layer of software called, I won't get into the detail, but it's up to your developers to output various bits of information which kind of sits with the software and the website, and it's very easy to maintain and robust. So to summarise all that, I suppose using the way you implement it, and Tag Manager will give you a very low upfront cost, a quicker implementation time, and it's kind of simpler and easier to maintain going forwards. So I suppose just to come on then to a few examples, really, because customs and dimensions didn't really mean a right lot to me until I saw exactly what that means in the real world. And I'll illustrate with a few of the more common ones, but like I said, these probably apply to quite a lot of businesses, but every business has unique things that are just for them, so that's kind of the skill, really. So in this example, everyone, logged in site, especially everyone's website, you want to understand the user itself. So if you get somebody to log in, your CRM holds data about the people that are logging in that isn't available to you in analytics. So we can output these different things, so user ID, when they created the account, how many transactions they've previously made, kind of the revenue, and if you've segmented these customers in your database, you might want to see that in analytics, so you can segment that behaviour and analyse behaviour of your segments. So that's kind of one very, very common example. Another one is the transaction. So a standard implementation of analytics will give you transactions, and that's kind of nothing too far-fetched, really, but there's a lot more you might want to understand about that transaction. So if you can output when a transaction occurs, if it's the first time somebody's bought, that's very important information, I would say, because you can value the new customer as well as the direct revenue. If you sell on credit or cash, you might want to define what type of purchase it is. And if it's a kind of subscription-based service, if they've signed up to a subscription, you might want to track that monthly revenue, because that can be valued separately to the direct revenue you've taken. So there's two examples, really, from an e-commerce. And I suppose to give you an example of what that means at the end of it all, what you're aiming for. So the example here is a very simple piece of information you might have about a channel, and users and transactions are two of the most important metrics I'm sure you're interested in. But the ability, when you customize your implementation, it kind of gives you this ability to make it so much more granular and get such a deeper understanding of what I suppose you're trying to understand and track. Just to go through a few of the examples there, we've applied a segment of customer segment, so that's your internal CRM segment. We could split your transactions to see who's buying, and likewise we've split the transactions into the number of first purchases, cash or credit, and the kind of recurring revenue on the right hand side. So that's the same data effectively as that, but we've broken it down so much more. Another huge use is once you've got all this customized dimensions, you can kind of understand behaviour of these different people. So there we've got this established customers, which is kind of defined by your CRM, I guess, and you can see how they behave and compare them to anonymous customers and so on. And again, this is a fairly simple one, but you know, you can use it to, I suppose, key different sessions or users or hits. So when we do extract it, we've got a way of joining it to other data, which isn't a feature, I guess, out of the box, really. So, and then finally, I'm not going to touch on this because I'll steal Ed's thunder for later, but this is a huge feature of Google Analytics 360, and it's a real differentiator between other platforms that will, you know, if you've got a large double-click spend, it'll pay for the tool itself if you do it right. So, yeah, another example then. So, you know, I've taken an example of an insurance quote engine. So, you know, compare the market, for example, or something like that. Their whole website revolves around the thing that is a quote. So they obviously want to understand that much better. If you had the bog standard implementation, you just have pages and events which can give you an awful lot, but the centre of their world is the quote, so you'd rightly want to add lots of metadata around that quote so you can understand it when you create reports within the tool itself. So I've given a few examples there: postcode, region, age, what vehicle and brand people are getting quotes for, the quote amount, and there may be other metadata around the quote. So, you know, I won't give too many examples of reports that you can get out on this example, but you know, the point is you might have a simple view of a quote on a standard implementation, but if you add these dimensions in, you can start to break it down and get a much more visibility, I guess, into the things that you're interested in your business. There you go. So, yeah, so that's kind of customizing it in terms of dimensions and metrics, and there's an awful lot that you can do, so give me a shout if anyone's got any questions on that afterwards. But coming to kind of a next, and this is something we do a lot for companies, and that's a huge problem that most people have, really, and some people more than others. But they pay a lot of money to get people to your website, but then stuff goes on offline or in a shop, and understanding that marketing spend and what it's doing offline is a huge challenge. So just to lead through a couple of examples which I hope you can all relate to. So this is kind of a lead generation, kind of B2B, very typically, where you spend a lot of money just getting people to your website, and they fill in a form, and then once they've filled in a form, that's it. The website doesn't see them that much, and it's not that informative. So once you've got them to fill in a form, everything happens offline. So, and typically you'd use a CRM to track, you know, these types of things that are going on. There's no visibility of that in analytics, so you can't really easily join up your marketing spend and analyse marketing spend to what's driving the pound sign at the end, and not just the inquiries, because, you know, they can convert, different channels can convert forms to revenue at a very different rate. Another example, this is an example of the data that to make the point I've just made. So these two campaigns or keywords maybe seem to be performing the same based on what you'd get on a standard analytics setup. But it's only when you start to understand what's going on offline can you truly make judgments on those keywords or campaigns. So there we can see there's a huge drop-off on the more generic campaign. You know, the closed sales, you know, the value that you're getting from the different channels is much different there. So, yeah, another example. So this is a typical one for people that have a bricks and mortar kind of high street presence. You know, typically you'll get a lot of people to your website that will research online, and then they'll go and try it on in store or go and have a look, and they want to touch it and feel it. So there's, you know, out of the box, there's no way of understanding that easily, really. So a huge problem. So, you know, as an example here, it looks like the dresses campaign there for a fashion retailer is breaking even, and the socks is killing it with 250% return on investment. That's what you're getting online. But then if you supplemented that with what people were actually doing in the real world, you know, no one goes and tries pairs of socks on, so probably everyone was buying them online. But maybe people wanted to go and see the dress, and they were just doing research. So it's an example really of how you can understand when you join it with this extra information. So I've explained the problem there, but the solution. So Google Analytics has a solution, a very good solution really. It takes a little bit of work to get it in place, but the returns it can give you are huge, I think. So it's called the measurement protocol. So this is it's a mechanism, I guess, a published format for pushing hit level data in from any kind of network device or application. So that can be typically a point of sale application in a store, or a CRM like Salesforce, I think somebody mentioned earlier. And we would help define how you push those hits in. It's actually sounds complicated, and it scared me when I first heard the measurement protocol. What's that? But really, at the end of the day, it's just creating a URL that has certain parameters on, and it's not more complex than that, really. So this is an example of a measurement protocol hit, and there's probably parameters in there that people are familiar with, but if, let's say, you were trying to track a transaction, you'd have a transaction ID parameter and a transaction revenue parameter. And there's a couple of examples about the type of things here that you might want to track. For example, an event about a meeting being booked once one of your sales team was following up an inquiry, or a point of sale kind of transaction that occurred in store. You'd have to find. So the second kind of concept that we kind of need to be familiar with, I've explained the kind of mechanism to get that data into Google Analytics, but the second concept we kind of need to get familiar with is this, what I call a kind of join key, and that a key is kind of a database term for having a parameter that can join two data sources together. So, and it's just the same with analytics and offline data, really. So there's two methods we can do that. Google Analytics has its kind of own inbuilt ID, so whenever you go on a website in a cookie that you don't really want to know about, there's an ID that represents you as a visitor. So there's ways of getting that, and then if somebody fills in a form, we can push that across with the form. And then once that's in your CRM, you can use that, and any information you push into Google Analytics, we can use that ID, and it'll join everything up within the analytics interface. The second way is more used if you're trying to track an ongoing relationship, and this is more typically for a logged on site that it isn't just a one-off purchase. So for example, a fashion retailer that people return to regularly. And within your CRM, against each user, you'll have an ID, and you can use that ID. Whenever someone logs in and navigates the website, we can output that ID. But also when somebody phones up, for example, and buys something, we can use that in the measurement protocol hit. Or likewise, if you can identify someone in a point of sale in a store by getting their email address, or using a loyalty card, or however you do that, if you can identify that person, you can use that ID and push information into analytics against them. And I suppose just to illustrate the power of what that can give you, this is a case study of a French retailer that kind of did this process, and they managed to connect offline purchases with their online activity, and they managed to identify that they were getting, I suppose, 20% of store visits are preceded by an online visit, and that kind of the spend they were making online was actually giving them almost 2.5 times more return than they first thought. And that's, if you think about what that means in terms of what you're willing to pay for a pay-per-click ad, it can be the difference between playing around at the bottom of the page or being in position 1 or 2 and kind of dominating that market. So I suppose not having that information when your competitors do have it is very, it's damaging to a certain extent. So, I was just going to touch now, people have touched on this before today, but this BigQuery integration, and this is a huge thing in Google Analytics 360. You only get this with the 360 package. And I suppose one of the big problems with the standard version of Google Analytics 360 is that although you own all the data, you can't really get to it. You can run custom reports, but there's limitations to how many dimensions you can access at any one time, and the amounts of data, and there's problems with sampling, and probably a lot of things that you all know about. So for an enterprise level, enterprise customers want access to the data, and it's kind of a one-click integration where you set it up, and daily it will be pushing all that hit-level data into your BigQuery account. And once you've got that data there, it's kind of up to you what you want to do with it. You might just like having it there. Don't know why, but typically would use it, and you can do things like you could just analyse that in a bit more depth. If the standard interface doesn't give you what you want, you can interrogate that data, or you can join it with kind of other data sources like a CRM, for example, and do all kinds of analysis, attribution, or so on, lifetime value. And then once you've got it in there, you can push it out to wherever you want. So Data Studio is one example, but you can push it to other data sources, other databases, other reporting platforms. It's your data. Do what you want with it. So a couple of examples then on types of things I would do and suggest and encourage everybody to do once you've got BigQuery, access to your data within BigQuery. So this is one that's I think is quite common. So an e-commerce company is all about making revenue, obviously. But to do that, you've got there's different strategies. One is attracting new customers, and one is just kind of getting them to keep returning and buying. So, an example I've given here is you could create two cohorts of first-time purchasers on different products. So you might be spending a lot of money on getting people to these two types of categories on your website. And first you'd think, oh great, TVs are worth a lot more, we'd get a lot more from that sale, I'll pay a lot more for that kind of customer acquisition. But if you join that up in BigQuery with kind of CRM data, you'd be able to kind of do a lifetime value kind of analysis, and you'd get a much deeper understanding of exactly what that new customer acquisition meant in terms of value to the customer. And if you saw a picture like that, you might then recognise, well, actually, I'll a lot more aggressively target clothing customers, and pay a lot more on your pay-per-click clothing account or campaign. Another example is I've given here a catalogue business where obviously have a website, and they do a lot to encourage people to websites. So the standard analytics would give you kind of an understanding to a certain extent of what's going on, but you might do a lot offline. So you might send out mail shots or catalogues, you might take transactions offline, and you might do refunds offline. So if you can tie that together in BigQuery, you could do it with the measurement protocol and get that set up, but if you've not done that, you can do it in BigQuery as well, and do analysis to see how the effect of catalogues, sending out a catalogue on online purchases, and how that's driving online visits. And it may be that some segments of your customers throw it in the bin and they never come to your website, and you might want to know that. But then there'll be some segments of customers that as soon as you send them a catalogue are on your website the next day, and these are the ones you would focus on with your direct marketing activities. So it's got some really good uses, and it's really limited by your ability with SQL and I suppose what your motivation, what you want to get out of it, really. So yeah, a huge enterprise feature you get with 360. So the last kind of feature I want to touch on really is something called enhanced e-commerce. I don't know if many people have heard of this, but it's kind of a huge kind of feature for e-commerce companies that I would strongly encourage people to look at and think about implementing. So the standard GA product out of the box puts kind of really the content and the user, I guess, at the centre of kind of the reports you get. But if you're an e-commerce retailer, the centre of your world is the product. You want to see everything in terms of how the products are doing, and that's not that easy with the standard reports you would get. So Google have given this feature called enhanced e-commerce, and it's really about understanding how those products perform through what I call the kind of e-commerce funnel. So if you think about a typical e-commerce website, you know, your product appear as impressions in category lists or search results or cross-sell lists, and then people click on them to view the product page, add them to cart, then they go through a checkout process, hopefully buy, and hopefully not get a refund, but it does happen. So you want to see how your products are performing right through this kind of e-commerce funnel. And the way Google Analytics allows you to do that is really by tracking each product at every step, really. So it supplements the data it sends into its reporting interface at each of these different steps, and you can really get some quite powerful insights if you're using that. So if you're an e-commerce company, you need to do this really, because it's so powerful. So I'll just run through a couple of examples really of the types of reports you do get with this feature. So I've talked about product lists, so you know you've got different product lists such as the search results or your category. Switched on. That'll be fine, I'm almost done. So yeah, you've got these search lists like search results, category results, cross-sells. You might have things like recently viewed panels. You know, your products are appearing as impressions all over your website, and you want to know where they are. And this kind of report gives you a little bit of insight into that. So not only does it show you where they're appearing, that's product list views, shows you how many people are clicking through from those lists, how many kind of add to baskets should be attributed to those lists, and likewise how many people have gone through the checkout and actually gone on to buy something. So that gives you an incredible amount of understanding about your list, and you can, you know, that's quite a high level, your search results. It doesn't tell you a right lot in itself, but when you can supplement it with secondary dimensions like category, you know, which category it is, for example, you might be able to identify problems in certain categories or products or parts of your website. The next example is kind of a product performance report, and like I said, it puts the product at the centre of the reporting interface, I guess. So again here you've got kind of products, and I've got product there, but it could be SKU or it could be a category. There's lots of different dimensions you can apply and view these things on, but it kind of shows you where your products are seen. So, you know, if you're responsible for merchandising and looking after the toasters section of your website, you want to know how your products are performing, and this puts data in the right people's hands to kind of improve different parts of the website. So here we've got kind of where they're getting product views, kind of how many people are viewing the product page, you know, how many people are adding to a basket, and then all this information that's going through this kind of sales e-commerce funnel. And like I said, it's kind of, it gives you a level of reporting and understanding that you previously didn't have, or it was very hard to get really. So definitely, if you're an e-commerce company, consider this if you're not already doing it. So I've kind of touched on 4 different areas there that are typical things that we might do on an advanced kind of implementation, but you know, I suppose Google Analytics is such a powerful tool, especially with the additions you get with 360. I've not even been able to scratch the surface really, so you know, if there's any questions around what I've mentioned or indeed anything else, then please fire away.
Yeah, just one question. There was a slide on client ID.
Yeah.
So that client ID is created when there's a cookie tracking. Is that right?
Yeah. So when the first time you go to a website, the
Yeah.
Google Analytics tracking script
Yeah.
identifies you've not been there, and it'll put a cookie on your machine, and it's a simple cookie. It just has an ID in it.
Right.
So every time you visit a page, that ID gets sent with every hit, and it lasts for I think 2 years. By default, so that's how it joins every hit into a user and a session and joins everything together really. So if you're talking about you're tracking something offline, we can there's a way of extracting that ID and putting it in, say, a hidden field in an inquiry form, and then when stuff happens in your CRM, you can push information as if it was from the website itself, but it goes against that user. So you can then join up, Joe Bloggs, who's come via a display ad, then a paid search ad, and then filled in an inquiry form. That's where it used to end. But if you do this measurement protocol thing and use that ID, you can then say, well, actually, the salesperson's phoned them up, it's a positive lead. You could say track a custom dimension around the sector they're in, or all kinds of things that happen up you define offline, and then ultimately you want to know if they've bought something or the outcome of that inquiry. So we're doing a lot of this with different companies now, and it gives you a level of visibility that can change your whole strategy and how you view your marketing campaigns. Anything else?
Could you use the measurement protocol for TV measurement?
No, not really, I guess. You need TV, yeah. Okay, that's two questions. To answer the first one, no, I guess, because to track something that goes on offline, you need to track it against a user. So if the catalogue example I gave you, you send something out to Joe Bloggs who lives wherever, you know who that user is, so you can push data against that person and see it in analytics. So that's kind of the requirement, I guess, to do that. TV attribution is not something you can do in Google Analytics, but Attribution 360 you can, and there's other tools that kind of do this as well. But you can't tie the user to who's seen an ad, but you can gauge the effect of a TV ad. So you kind of do it, I think, by you plug into the tool ad slots and times and locations and regions, and Attribution 360 and Google Analytics would kind of it demonstrates the effect. So if you put out a TV ad at a key time on a Saturday night, you would hope, unless it's a very bad ad, that everyone would come on your website quite shortly after. So it kind of, I suppose it ties in the effect of that ad, and if you get a load of sales on 8 o'clock on a Saturday just after your ad, you can kind of, I suppose, infer that they've come from your TV ad. But there's no way of specifically joining people, because I suppose if Google TV ever takes off and they've got IDs against what you're watching, maybe. But anything else?
Okay.
Yeah. If there's any. Cheers.